All right, we're starting a unit that's actually three-part mini unit called Major Expenditures, and the three parts are going to include housing, transportation, and food in separate parts. So, starting off with just a general overview of typical consumer spending. Over 60% of average spending involves food, transportation, and housing. So you can see here how those are broken up. And housing is where we're going to start. Specifically, housing comprises about 34% of the average person's normal expenditures. Uh, Side note, household housing is divided further into payments for the housing, like so your rent payment or your mortgage payment, utilities, furniture, other equipment, household operations, and household supplies. So all of those together are what we're talking about with housing, not just um, the house um, payments itself. Housing is the largest expense for most people, but prices do vary, and those prices can vary by these three factors: size, location, and amenities. And that is the first blank that's on your note taking guide. You will need to choose the housing that fits your personal needs, such as location, size, and also the amenities, and also what fits your spending plan. So, whenever you are renting a home, first of all, you might encounter these three vocabulary terms. The landlord, that's the person who owns the property and rents it to you. Rent is the price that you are paying for the use of someone else's property. And a tenant is you. That is the person who rents the property. Common rental expenses. There are five listed on your note taking guide. So that includes the rent payment itself, the utilities, um, household furnishings, and some rental places are going to come furnished. And that means that typically they will have a lot of the common furniture, not necessarily decor or sheets or things like that, but some of the common furniture. It may also include renter's insurance that you would pay for to cover a loss of either by way of theft or fire or whatever from any of your personal belongings inside that rental unit. And then finally, communications. So your internet, TV, phone, things like that. You can find out about places to rent from several locations. A property management company is a good one to start with. Sometimes there are ads in the newspaper, especially if somebody is, just a average person owns a property and wants to advertise. You might find some things from your friends and family, bulletin boards if we're in 1990 still, or online boards. When you're comparing properties, you want to think about several things. What are your have to haves? What are your preferred to haves? And hopefully, you'll be able to visit the properties that you're interested in before you make your final selection. You also need to know what you can afford. You're going to need to evaluate your spending plan and see what is feasible for you. Calculate the total cost of all those things, not just the rent payment, but also the utilities, the communications, the furniture, renter's insurance, all those things together. And you also want to understand the policies. You'll want to read the contract and make sure you know what you're agreeing to before you sign it. Oops, I think I went backwards. There we go. So, questions that you might want to ask a rental property: how much is the rent? When is it due? What's the rental contract length? So, that is also known as the lease. So, how long am I committed to living here and paying rent? Typical is 1 year at a time. So, after a year of living in the same place, you would then sign a new lease for another year. Sometimes you can find a 6-month lease or even a month to month lease. And so you would want to find what works best for you. Who's responsible for each bill involving utilities? Is your electric included as part of your rent, or are you responsible for that separately? Amenities, what's available? Do they have a pool? Are there laundry facilities? What furniture is provided? Are there any additional charges for using any of those amenities? When you are comparing rental properties, you want to look at the policies and just see if you need to rule one of them out because of one of these policies. So, do they have any restrictions for overnight guests, pets, parking, safety features? Who's responsible if something needs to be repaired or just for general maintenance? Are you going to need to take care of that? Are you going to need to pay for it? Or are they going to take care of it? What are the eviction terms? Eviction means that they are kicking you out. They are cutting off the contract and making you leave. And also just know your rights. Um, on the note-taking guide, it says why should you learn about the policies? So learning about policies just makes sure that you understand how to properly live in that place and not violate any of the contract terms. So that's why. Common rental application questions. When you decide where you want to live, now you're going to fill out a rental application. It might ask who's going to be living there. What is your employment or income? They're going to make sure that you have a job to be able to pay the rent. They may look at your rental history. Where else have you lived? Did you fulfill the lease terms there? Did you pay your payments? Things like that. And that also kind of ties into getting a credit history check. They will probably check your credit and just make sure that you are good for paying things on time. And they may also check references, someone who's going to verify that you are a responsible individual. Reading the rental agreement. The rental agreement is a legal contract between the landlord and you're responsible for following that contract. So it is important that you read it and that you really understand what you need to do to make sure that you don't get evicted or any other legal ramifications, things like that. The rental agreement is also known as the lease. And I don't think that's on your note-taking guide, but just so you know, you want to make sure that you don't pay anybody rent or a deposit or anything like that unless they have a rental agreement. So you might think that, hey, this is nice. I'm not going to have to sign anything. But on the other hand, you're also not protected because you didn't sign something. Initial expenses whenever you are have chosen a rental property and you're getting ready to move in, you may be required to pay a prepayment of first and last month's rent. That's very common. So if you're planning on living there a year, you're going to pay for January, you're going to pay for December. And then you don't have to come up with another payment until February, and you'll come up with a payment every single month. But then if you decide to leave at the end of December, you've already paid for December, and so now you can use what you would have paid in December to secure the new house where you're going to be staying. And this is also just to make sure that if you flake out on them and they can't get payment from you, they've already kind of covered themselves financially to not lose out on that rent payment. Also very common is a security deposit. That's a payment that you pay up front that you hopefully will get back whenever you leave. That's going to cover any costs the landlord may have to pay when you leave to clean out the apartment, to repair damages or replace carpets, anything like that. Now, talking about purchasing a home instead of renting. A real estate agent is a licensed individual who represents a buyer or a seller. Usually, both the buyer and the seller will have a real estate agent. Doesn't have to be the same real estate agent. And they're going to represent you and the seller in a contractual transaction to purchase that property. They help buyers by finding property that addresses your needs and wants. They find a property that fits your spending plan, and they're going to help you by working through that contract and closing process. Very valuable there. Okay, a home loan may be used to purchase a home. Most of the time, people do get a loan for a home because it's a very large purchase and people don't always have that kind of cash built up whenever they need to buy a home. The lender, the bank, or whoever you're using to lend you the money, is going to determine the maximum amount that can be borrowed. So most people will get pre-approved for a home loan, and so maybe the bank says, "Okay, you can spend up to $75,000 on a home, and we're still within your budget." Um, and they're going to also determine the credit terms, like the interest rate and the length of the loan. Some things that they are going to evaluate. They're going to evaluate your credit history, your income, your net worth, meaning the things that you own versus the things that you owe, and your income and expense statement. So they're going to just evaluate you as a whole, your financial picture, to be able to tell what they think you can afford to pay back regularly. The mortgage payment is the payment that you're going to pay every month towards that loan to eventually pay it off. And that is going to include not just the amount of the loan. So that's this one, cost of the home. Yes, it includes that. It's also going to include interest because it is credit. It's also going to include funds to pay property taxes. So typically, property taxes are due on your home once a year at the end of December. Property taxes can be quite a chunk of money for something valuable like a house. So instead of having you come up with a couple $1,000s at the end of the year, in order to pay your property taxes, that's just going to be split evenly among 12 months and added to your monthly mortgage payment. Same thing with homeowners insurance. That can also be a big chunk of money that you might not want to have to pay for at one time. So instead, they're going to divide it up evenly throughout the 12 months of the year and have you pay just a little bit at a time. Also, just ensures that you do purchase homeowners insurance, which is really important in case something happens to your house out of your control. Um, you will want to look at all of the expenses of owning a home. So, the mortgage is one part of that, the payment of the loan, but also utilities. You're going to have, electric, sewer, water, gas, trash, whatever is involved in your home to pay for as well. And those vary based on the size and the efficiency of the home. Household furnishings. Maybe you've never had a home with more than one or two rooms before. You've never had to come up with that furniture, and now you do. So that's going to be an additional cost. Special assessments. I'm skipping over that one. Homeowners association dues. So this only applies if you live in certain types of communities, a gated community, um, a community that has special amenities like maybe a golf course or a swimming pool or something like that where there's a little bit more going on than most of the places in Salem. And sometimes it can be just a neighborhood that a developer has decided that everybody in this neighborhood has to have a house that is at least 2,000 square feet and it has to have a brick front, things like that. So if you live in a place like that, you have to pay typically homeowners association dues, and those can be charged once a month, that's typical, or once a year. And if that's part of your cost, now you have that to add on to your other expenses, your mortgage and your utilities. Maintenance and repairs. Now that you're a homeowner, you are responsible if anything goes wrong with your house. And so you need to plan for those expenses, maybe save up a little money set aside so that if something has to be repaired, you don't have to come up with it right away. And then, of course, communications involving internet, TV, and phone again. Significant initial expenses are going to be a down payment. This is a portion of the purchase price that you're not putting into the loan. So, for example, if you buy a $50,000 house, A typical down payment is going to be from 5 to 20% of the purchase price. So maybe it would be required that you put at least $5,000 down in cash. That means you're going to be getting a loan for the remaining $45,000. But that is going to help you by reducing the amount that you're going to have to borrow and shortening the loan, therefore, because you're going to have less interest built up over time. You can get something called mortgage insurance that protects you, or protects the lender rather, if you don't provide at least a 20% down payment. And it's going to depend on where you get your loan, what down payment they're going to require. There are certain loans that allow you to get to put down nothing down as a down payment. But usually they're going to make up for that risk that they're giving you by making you purchase mortgage insurance. And that means that if you skip out somehow, or if one of you passes away, they are now going to pay back the loan, and it's going to protect them, and it's also going to protect you. Closing costs are another thing added to initial expenses, something that happens at the very beginning of purchasing a house. And there's various closing costs, but they're just some different fees and different charges that are going to be required as you're going through that purchase process. Typically, it is going to be between 1 and 4% of the purchase price in addition to the purchase price. So, one scenario is that you have a down payment and you are going to put 20% down, which is $50,000 of this. Do we know how much the house is worth? I don't think we do. Oh, there it is, $250,000 house. Okay, this is a little extreme for where we live and our typical income. But if we're talking about buying a $250,000 house, 20% is $50,000. That means in order to buy this house, you would have to have $50,000 in cash in order to even have a loan. You're going to get a 3.5% interest rate, which is pretty good, and you're going to be paying on it for 30 years. Long time. Your monthly payment is going to be $1,100, and over the course of that 30 years, with your payments and with the interest, you're going to end up paying $417,000 for this house. Ouch. 30-year loan is not ideal, just saying. If you were only able to put 5% down as a down payment for that house, which is $12,500, still sounds like a lot of money. Your monthly payment is going to be higher. It's now going to be $1,300, and over the course of the loan, you're going to pay even more, $477,000. You are going to pay also $8,700 in mortgage insurance because you're not able to pay that 20%. And here is a different scenario that shows different credit scores. So same house, let's assume that you're going to pay that $50,000 as a down payment and you have a 30-year loan. If you have a 780 credit score, I'm going to have to quit moving or it keeps showing things. Then you're going to be rewarded by getting a lower interest rate, 3.3% interest rate. Your monthly payment is going to be $1,136, and total over the course of those 30 years, you're still going to be paying $409,000 for that home. If you have a slightly lower credit score, a 720, you're going to be paying a little bit more in interest, so 3.5%. So it only equates to about $22 extra a month in your monthly payment. But over the course of the 30 years, you're going to be spending another $8,000 on that house. Just shows you how much interest you pay on a home loan. So the more that you can come up with at the beginning in cash, the less impact this number has, for sure. All right. Equity is, I think, the last definition that you're having to define. And equity is how much of the house do you own? So say you have paid your payments on that house over the course of 5 years. After that amount of time, you own some of that house. You've made payments toward the actual loan of that house, and that's the equity. So if you were to sell the house right now, how much would you get to pocket as kind of profit from all that you have paid so far? There are some benefits of owning versus renting. You have pride that you own a house. There are some tax benefits involved. You have the opportunity to build equity. So once you have your loan paid off, now the entire value of the house is your equity, and you could sell it and pay cash for a different house if you wanted to. However, there are also some risks of owning. You often will have unanticipated expenses. Something breaks, something goes wrong, something major is wrong with the foundation or whatever. And whatever comes up, you are going to be responsible for those costs. The property value is also not guaranteed to go up. So, depending on where it is or how old it is, it's possible that the property value will go down. So, you buy it at 50,000, you expect to sell it at maybe 55,000, you expect the price to go up, but instead it goes down because maybe the very next door neighbor um, trashes their yard, and that makes people not want to buy your home or something like that. And so it could also be difficult to sell. Whenever you're ready to sell, maybe there's no buyers that want exactly what you have. So those are the risks that you take in buying a home.